recess the Commissioners Court and convene a meeting of the Montgomery County Toll Road Authority. Item 20A is to consider and take appropriate action on the proposed engineering service agreement between the Montgomery County Toll Road Authority and SWCA Environmental Consultant. It's one that I think that Bobby Adams with Half Associates, our GEC, has negotiated along with Jeff Johnson, and I would move approval of that.
That's a second.
Questions or comments? All in favor? Motion carries. Item B, consider and discuss updates from the county engineer, county judge, county auditor, and the proposed 249 tollway, including cost projections, traffic revenue studies, and investment grade financing plan, timeline, proposed tolls for 249 phase 2 of the pass-through program.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that was on.
Yeah, that was it. So, Mr. Mueller, you
Yes,
just, I've asked Mr. Mueller to come talk portions of it. Ryan O'Hara is here to talk about the financing. James Baker with Half Associates on some of the instructions. Mr. Mueller.
Good morning, Judge, Commissioners. Thank you all for having us. Appreciate this opportunity to update you on the 249 project. As the Judge indicated, we've got a couple of folks that will get into the details, but I'll just give you a brief overview. Today we're going to talk about where we are on costs, where we are on financing plan, and where we are on timeline. We'll go through that, and then I think we have another agenda item to talk about more philosophical issues with respect to toll road financing. But with that, I'll turn it over to James Baker with Hatton Associates to talk about where we are currently with cost and schedule.
Good morning. We prepared a total cost, project cost in 2015 for this project, and it's approximately $73 million. The cost includes $60 million in construction costs, which also includes the ITS costs and the tolling infrastructure.
So 73 million total?
73 million, and I can provide a copy of the estimate to everybody up there. It has $1 million in right-of-way utility relocation costs included in that number, as well as $12 million in soft costs. The soft costs include the program management, preliminary engineering, schematic and design analysis, hydraulic analysis, surveying, geotechnical testing, environmental permitting is included in that soft cost, final design, construction management, and construction oversight and testing for materials. Construction cost estimate was prepared using data available from similar projects. We utilized the bid tabs from Harris County's Phase 1 of 249, very similar project within the existing right-of-way. Used that for unit costs. We recently updated those unit costs based on a project just let for Hardy Toll Road widening as well. Additionally, with our estimates, we included an escalation factor. The escalation factor is based on ENR's construction cost indices. We used a 10-year average of 3.6% to grow those costs to the midpoint of construction. And when we do that, it brings the total to more around $80 million total. And that's taking it up to a November 2017 estimate.
That's turnkey.
Yes, sir. Yep. I'm going to go ahead and skip down to the timeline, and then I'll pass it over to for traffic and revenue. We worked closely with Hector to develop a schedule for this project. Their phase 2 of this project goes from 2920 up to the county line, Spring Creek, across all the way to the north abutment of the bridge. The estimate for their section is $93 million. It includes building main lanes and frontage roads through there in front of the college. Their schedule is to go to construction in August of 2016 and be completed by August of 2018. The schedule for our 3.6 mile section is going to blend in with that. So we'll let later than them, we'll let probably the first of 2017, and construction will be complete at the same time as theirs so that it can be open all as one facility.
That's August of 18.
Yes, sir.
And does that coincide with TxDOT's plan going further west?
Yeah, their plan is aggressive, but this project can open without TxDOT's project because we're tying into the existing frontage roads. They're building the overpass that goes up and over the railroad.
And Craig, you may know the answer to this. Has there been any movement with TxDOT in Grimes County?
Yes, Grimes County had a resolution passed in their last commission board approving the 249 project.
So no to yes, or yes to no to yes?
Yes. And the current status of our schedule on the project is that we're in schematic development and drainage analysis. Field surveying is ongoing right now. They've got about 60% of the topographic surveying done. About 40% of that's been processed. and we are expected to commence final design of the project this summer.
Thank you, Mr. President.
One of the items on the agenda is talk about the investment grade feasibility study. We have an investment grade feasibility study that was done in 2014 as part of Hector's look at the project. The numbers you'll hear today are based on that study. When you go to market with debt for toll roads, you need the investment grade feasibility study to be dated within about 6 months of the bond issue, so that it's got current data in it. But there's no reason to spend money on updating that until we get closer to the time when we're ready to go to construction. And so we're going to talk about numbers based on the 2014 report, but understand that we will update that as we get closer to the time it's ready to go.
I can only imagine those numbers are better.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The project, I guess, is pretty similar to this one, where you're building in existing right-of-way, overpasses and main lanes. Fort Bend County's portion of Grand Parkway looks a lot like this project.
Harris County just did.
Yeah, Peace Harris County just did it, and I think in both those cases, the revenues are higher than the CDM Smith projections. I know in Fort Bend County, they're about 20% higher. So the good news is that when we go to update this study, we will have a pretty good amount of history on the Harris County portion of Toll Road that they can use to update their model. So again, the numbers that Ryan is going to talk about are based on that 2014 study, but it will be updated before we do any further things.
So if we were going to try to let this project in early 2017 or even late 2016 start, so we're getting to that time where we need this investment grade study?
So you would probably, the way I would recommend you do it is, and a lot of the timing depends on Harris County's project, because obviously you don't want to be ahead of them, but you want to be as close to them as possible. What would be ideal is that we get to the point where we're ready to go bid the project. Harris County has already bid the project, so we know what the numbers came in at on their project. We then take bids on the project before we have sold bonds, but we leave enough time between opening the bids and award of the contract to get the bonds sold and closed. That way, when you go to sell the bonds, you know exactly how much you need. You're not over borrowing, you're not under borrowing. So our let date is,
February 2017.
so we would probably be in the bond market somewhere around February 2017.
And is there funding in those numbers that you talked about ongoing right before the upgrade of the traffic and revenue?
Yes.
So anytime after August of this year, then we could probably start to move forward with that.
I would wait till late summer of 16.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well, Ryan talked about the numbers based on
Any
those.
preliminary 2014 data that was taken from Harris County, did that CNR study, does it assume that Woodlands Parkway will connect to 249, or is that not?
There's an assumption on the Woodlands Parkway, but it is, I want to say it's 2025.
It's, I have a copy of the report for Ollie. I brought one for everybody on the court, but when I was reading it, it assumes that Woodlands Parkway is completed in 2023.
But hold on. The other thing, I'm not sure that it had the TxDOT piece being completed as soon as is currently scheduled. So they'll have to update it to reflect the TxDOT piece going north being sooner than they had in 2014. Right?
Is this not the 1488?
Yes.
Correct.
Judge Commissioner Brown here at Frost Bank. I did pass out before court opened an overview. We last did an update, I want to say August of 14, so this has a lot of the updated numbers that Mr. Baker was talking about. On page 1 of the presentation, this is taken directly from that traffic and revenue study that CDM Smith did. And that yellow column highlights the annual revenues, and that's what I used to base my model off of. So that's basically just pulled directly from that TNR study. Page 3 of the presentation shows you the difference, kind of get into the different financing options that are available to the county and the Toll Road Authority. Looking at revenue bond index, the red line there shows interest rates at a 4.18%. Revenue bonds are treated a little different in the market, considered a little riskier, so they trade at a little higher interest rates. County-backed issuance are obviously considered a better investment by the bond buying community. That current index is at a 2.45%, so much lower. And that's kind of the genesis of the two different financing options that we've been presenting to you for some time now. On page 4, it gives an overview of what those different options mean. I know Mr. Baker talked about, I wanted to be a little more conservative, so we assumed a project cost of $85 million. I know we just talked about 73, inflating to 80, but I used 85. Yeah, it was over 100, and we did the run at 100, and then we did a run at 90, and so I'm kind of pulling it down each time. So we're at 85 million. On the left-hand side of the page, you can see if we do a revenue bond issue, we're looking at $109.2 million in total par amount. The big reason why that's so high is, if you'll see there, we have to create a reserve fund of about $8.6 million that we don't have to if we do the general obligation route, which you can see on the right-hand side there is about a $97 million issuance. And you can see the difference in the interest rates is about 85 basis points, or 0.85%. On page 5, there's a lot of detail and a lot of numbers on here, but basically this is the pro forma, if you will, for the revenue bond issue. It shows the annual revenues coming in, total collections, M&O expenses, everything going out, and you can see the net revenue. So this is a viable project as a revenue issue. We do have 1 year where projected revenues come in a little lower, and we have to tap into our cumulative reserves out there in 2020. But it's a viable option. Page 6 shows you the power if we use the county's backing to issue these bonds. We don't have a year where there's not revenue production. And if you'll look at it out in 2035, we showing projections of about $166.5 million in net revenues. In all of my projections, C.M. Smith takes the revenues and takes them all out to 2055. I stopped the revenue growth at 2035 just to be conservative. So that's a good bench year to kind of look and see, compare things out. Page 7 shows you just an analysis of what we refer to as the cost of self-insurance. We think this is a very viable project based on our toll road experience. But what the cost of doing a revenue issue through Montgomery County Toll Road Authority versus if it was backed by the county, it's roughly $60 million in additional cost to the county if it was done as a standalone revenue project.
You're saying that we could issue this debt as a general obligation bond?
That's correct.
Which the voters would have to vote on. And then we could still toll this project and have.
Correct. This is
I mean, that would be-
exactly what was done very successfully at Fort Bend County. I'll let Rich talk about the.
Typically, you would not have, you can do the GO backstop or self-insurance, as Ryan calls it, without an election. So you can do revenue bonds with a county backstop without having an election. You can do revenue bonds without an election. Obviously, you don't need an election for that since you're not using taxes. So you're not required to have an election to do a county backstop. If you did just tax bonds, no revenue, you should, let's just pay for this as a tax road, not a toll road. Obviously, that would require an election.
But if we do use the county as a backstop, we can hold an election, let the people have a say in do they want this or not, and we can save $60 million in the process.
Yeah, you can do it that way as well, yes.
I think that'd be an absolutely perfect.
How's it been done in the past in other areas where you've seen? You basically pledged the county's savings account.
It's been done both ways. Most recently in Fort Bend County on the Grand Parkway, it was done without an election, where they did it as a backstop. And keep in mind, when we talk about the backstop, what we're saying is you don't ever expect to use a single tax dollar at all. And if you do, then it's treated as a loan and gets repaid with interest, as opposed to putting tax dollars into the project to pay for the road as you would a traditional tax road, free road.
Never any tax dollar truly at risk.
Well, you've got to have some pot of money to pay it in the event of a shortfall. The numbers show there is no shortfall.
But that's assuming that the toll road actually makes money.
Yeah.
We've seen them in Austin recently where they have not.
Well, what I did, if you look on the last page, what I did, because I like to shock test these numbers, I basically took the revenues that were in the CDM Smith report, and I said, I cut them by 20%, so basically it's 80%. And it's a very viable project. We don't have any year where we go negative on our cumulative net revenue, so that kind of leads it into that comment, so I wanted to.
Yeah, and I think the analogy of the 130 project is a good one, because there's a pretty significant difference between that project and this project. And if you look at toll road projects in general, they all have varying degrees of risk. This project probably has the least amount of risk of any toll project I've ever seen, mainly because you've already got the right of way. You've got environmental clearance. You are really just tying into another portion of an existing toll road. That's very successful, and you're in a place where you've already got 2.8 million people with easy tags, and now we're using tags from all over to get on the road. That's very different from a greenfield toll road project where you have right-of-way risk, where you have environmental risk, and where you don't know what the traffic will be. We can get traffic counts on 249 today, right? So very different risk profiles on the 130 project versus this project. This project is...
I think my comparison was more just that the people behind that project believed that it was going to be work. The studies showed that it was going to work, and
Right.
it happened.
That's right.
There is no fail-safe, and if the county's backstopping this project, it is our tax dollars that are going to be on the line, because somebody's going to have to pay that debt, and we can give the people the right of way to vote in this project if they want it, and still move forward with completing it and having the toll. So I think that's a
That would be a cool decision.
very interesting.
Yeah, and you don't have to decide that today, right? No. The reason that the numbers on costs change is the further along we get in the process, the more certainty you have on costs and timing and that sort of thing, which is why you do your TNR study as close to the bond issue as possible, so that, you know, if it's February 17 and it's time to make a decision on selling bonds, we will know a lot more in February of 2017 than we know sitting here today.
Correct.
And you can make a decision as to whether you want to do revenue-only bonds, you want to do county backstop bonds without election, you want to do county backstop bonds with an election. That's not something we need to decide today. Those options are all out there, and as we get further down in the process, our information gets better and those decisions become easier.
No, but this would be just like any other bond election. It needs to be called in May or November, I assume, yeah, Marcus. So if we're going to do that next year, we have to kind of start that conversation.
2 years.
But if you wanted the money in 17, you need to vote on it probably by November 16.
November 16, we wait till May of 17. Yes.
Again, I kind of mentioned it on page 8 is the, I want to just reiterate, I'm assuming that $85 million project fund, I think we're going to be closer to 80 based on James's report. I stopped the revenue growth at 2035, and we cut the revenues, did a 20% haircut on the CDM Smith numbers. And over the life of the project, that still shows net revenues to the county after all debts and expenses are paid of just under $387 million. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, you look at this project, it's 3.5 miles, it's not Oldsbury, the right of ways there, environmental is clear, we're tying into one of the most successful toll road systems, and certainly in the region, probably in the country, I would assume, in an area that's growing exponentially.
I think with what you guys just said, it'd be a real easy sell to the voters.
All right, going back just quickly, Ryan, and looking at the, we were talking about the bonds that were issued for the pass-through program.
Yes, sir.
All right, but we paid down any of that total debt?
Yes, sir, we have.
Do we have any bonds that are funded that are financing interest on it?
No, sir, we don't. We've been pretty diligent on our our payment. We actually paid off just over, on March 1st, just over $20 million. We do have $401 million outstanding. But in that last, if you remember in that last bond process, we actually were upgraded on our rating by Standard & Poor's. I did pass out a report for you there, just to kind of give you an idea of what the market looks like, the bond buying market looks like. Basically, they took our rating from a AA, and we raised it to a AA+. And it says, based on, I quote here, based on the county's ongoing economic expansion and very strong financial profile. They cited bullet points of a strong economy, very strong budgetary flexibility, very strong liquidity, strong management, weak debt limit and weak debt and liabilities, and strong institutional framework is the rationale for upgrading. So basically, we're rated AA+ by S&P and AA1 by Moody's. We're one notch away from AAA. So the bond community and the investor community think very, very highly of Montgomery County.
Well, I've seen some publications that claim that there are bonds that are being serviced with debt that are interest only. That's not okay.
No, I think what probably maybe some of the confusion there is that I did pass out a debt profile that's hopefully in front of you there. It kind of gives you it's a little more of an optic view of the county's debt. There's a 2010 issue that we issued for the mental health facility. 2010A, I believe it's on page 3. I can't find my number. Page 3. Part of that finance plan there on the far right-hand side, there was a 2010A and a 2010B. The 2010A were bonds that matured on the short end of the yield curve. They're fixed rate bonds, and we chose at the time, this is on the heels of the recovery, national recovery, and there was a program called Build America bonds. So we're actually getting a subsidy on the B bonds, which start amortizing after the A bonds are retired. So that may be some of the confusion of, we didn't issue interest-only bonds. Those were issued at the same time, part of one finance plan. And we've been paid to date in a subsidy, just under $2 million by going that Build America bonds route, and we got another $8 million coming. So that's why we decided to go that route. Good deal for the county.
Very good. And can we issue bonds that are structured differently? For example, if we take some of the, say the bond issue passes, and we're going to issue some debt or some maintenance projects, can we finance those on a shorter term, or do they all have to be financed?
We've got the ability to finance bonds very, very short and up to 40 years by law. I've never done a 40-year issue, so we've got all kinds of flexibility. We also have the ability, you know, if the voters approve the $350 million, we decide, this court decides when and how much we sell. In some of our earlier projections, we just assumed that the county would sell $70 million each year for 5 years. So 70 times 5, that's a $350. We don't have to sell that. We could sell 50. I had a conversation. I don't think we've got 70 million in needs in that first 2015. So we've run numbers that show, you know, selling 50 million a year over 7 years. And it actually shows a little less impact on our debt structure.
You use numbers, you know, initially we asked you for a figure and it was around 200 million, because you used a very conservative number that would not drive a tax increase. You talk about that.
Yes, sir. In the first runs, we did $200 million, $300, $400 million just to kind of get us started in the process. There's roughly 20 variables that go into these bond sizing scenarios. In the first runs we did, we assumed a 5% assessed valuation growth for the county. I think the county's averaged, depending on what you look at, 8.5% to 9% AV growth over the past 10 years. So subsequent runs, we decided to raise that to an 8% AV growth. And that's why we ended up with $350 million. We sold $70 million a year over the 5 years. There would be no debt service tax rate increase, assuming that 8% growth. Conversely, if I talk about if we sell the bonds a little slower, if you will, under that $50 million a year scenario for 7 years, the county would only need to grow at a 5.5% AV growth for us to hold those same, no increase in the debt service tax rate. So it's kind of,
that's the key to tax rate.
yes, sir.
Not necessarily what the appraisals do or what the value of your property does.
That's correct.
It's the tax rate,
If AV goes up.
which is lower now than it was in '92.
Okay. Yeah.
And like I said, we have to make several assumptions on it. I think we're very conservative on the interest rate assumptions that we're using. The first issue we've got in here is at 4.75%. If we sold bonds today, it'd be closer to 3.5%, 3.6%. So, and we're assuming much higher rates for the longer bonds, because I do think interest rates are going to go up.
Well, I think as always, using those very conservative numbers are better than we initially looked at the 249 project with $112 million, I think, price tag.
Yes, sir.
It's still, so looking at the more realistic numbers gets better every day.
Correct.
Good. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. We will adjourn our meeting with the County Toll Road Authority and reconvene Commissioner Court.
Yeah, click on C. I think we can.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think we can do that when we actually get into talking about a toll and when it's going to be established. But just kind of some questions that I'm being asked is, how does the toll road authority plan on functioning? And so once we're moving to that, it's probably more appropriate.
Okay. Now we will recess, or we'll adjourn our meeting of the Garden County Toll Road Authority, reconvene our meeting of Commissioner Court, and retire to executive session for under Article 551071 and 551077.